and welcome to the FSAI's Breakfast Bite on starting a food business, what you need to know. I'm Emma and I'll be your host for the event this morning. So we're delighted you're here online with us. And I'm joined by my colleague Foteini. Foteini works on the FSAI's advice line. So the event this morning will last 14 minutes, 30 minutes for the presentation, followed by 10 minutes at the end for questions and answers. And if you do have any questions for Foteini, you can pop them in the chat box on your screen and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. So we've put together some business startup related publications that you might find useful after the event. And you'll notice these in the handout section on your screen and they can be downloaded if you like. There's also a link to a really handy business startup fact sheet, which you'll find in the chat box now. In addition, we'll email you with all the links mentioned this afternoon. And lastly, if you're on social media, please do let us know at #FSAI events. And now I'll hand you over to Foteini. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Emma, and welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be here today and see so many attendees that want to start a food business. So I will turn off my camera during the presentation, but at the end I will come back with Emma to go through your questions and we'll have the Q&A session at the end. Okay. So in this webinar, I'm going to cover the steps and requirements to start a food business. All food businesses, big or small, and whether operating from a business premises, in the home, or from a mobile unit or food stall, must be aware of the legislation regarding food hygiene and food safety, as we are legally responsible for ensuring the food you produce is safe. So we will have a look at each of these sections, starting with the requirement to register your business. I'm also going to talk about the food hygiene legislation and how you can develop your food safety management system. I will also cover what the training requirements are, what is a traceability system, and other specific legislation that might apply for you. Now, I would like to start with some definitions of regulation, the General Food Law, which is 178 of 2002. So, food is any substance or product, whether processed, partially processed, or unprocessed, intended to be ingested by humans. Food includes drinks, chewing gums, and any substance, including water, intentionally incorporated into the food during its manufacture, preparation, or treatment. Now, a food business is any undertaking, and whether for profit or not, and whether public or private, carrying out any of the activities related to any stage of production, processing, and distribution of food. The reason that I mention these definitions is that, for example, if you are thinking of selling only coffee and tea from a food truck, you are considered a food business and you must be registered and be aware of the food hygiene legislation. Or another example would be someone that wants to start a domestic business where they buy chocolates, make boxes and sell them. So what I mean is that even though they are not making the chocolates themselves, this is considered a food business again. And lastly, you can see that the legislation states that the food business operator is responsible for ensuring that the requirements of food law within their food businesses are met. Okay, so the first thing that you have to do is to register with a competent authority before you start operating, even if you're operating from home. This is free of charge and you should contact them at the earliest stage of your business development. They will be your inspector and can give you specific advice on any particular requirements or changes that may be needed. If you visit the food business section of our website, you will find the contact details of all competent authorities. And something else that I would like to flag here is that if you make any changes to your food business, such as a change of owner or address, a change in the type or the amount of food that you produce, then you must also inform your inspecting officers of these changes. So what are the competent authorities you must be registered with? We have the local Environmental Health Office of the HACCP, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, the local authority vet service, and the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. Who you registered with will depend on the type of business and whether foods of animal origins are handled or processed. But the majority of food business, as you can see here, the first one, like for example, such as restaurants, coffee shops, supermarkets, home businesses, food stalls, must register with the Environmental Health Office of the HACCP. If your business handles or processes foods of animal origins, you may also need approval. And typical businesses requiring approval would include slaughterhouses, meat product manufacturers, egg producers or producers of dairy products, and many others. So now here, if you see, Regulation 853 of 2004 lays down specific hygiene rules for food of animal origin, and the approval process is more detailed here. A business requiring approval must be approved before commencing trade, and we would advise you to contact your competent authority for advice at the earliest stage of your business development, because they will be able to provide you advice and discuss the requirements. And then once approved, your business will get a unique approval number. And an example of this is the identification marks that you see on milk and meat product packaging or labels. Now I will go through Regulation number 852 of 2004 on the hygiene of foodstuffs. This legislation sets out rules and general requirements on food hygiene, including the requirement to register, to have a food safety management system, training, and many other considerations that we will see in the next couple of slides. So Annex 2 of this legislation, so I would advise you to have a look into this, sets out the general requirements for all food business operators and covers the general requirements for food premises, for example, the specific requirements in rooms where foodstuffs are prepared, treated or processed, for example, floors, walls and surfaces where foods are handled, and they must be maintained, for example, in a sound condition and be easy to clean and disinfect if necessary. It also sets out requirements for transport, equipment, food waste, and water supply. It also sets out requirements for personal hygiene, pest control, temperature control, wrapping and packaging, and training. Of course, we can go through the details of each one of these now, but I have summarized some important information here. So bacteria that cause food poisoning grow at temperatures between 5 and 63 degrees, and they grow best at warm temperatures, for example, 25 to 40 degrees. So you should always keep cold food below 5 degrees and hot food above 63 degrees. You should also wash hands frequently, excuse me, keep raw and cooked food separate to avoid cross-contamination, clean as you go, use reputable suppliers, have good workflow to reduce risks, and also train your staff. As we said, the hygiene legislation requires all food businesses to have a food safety management system in place based on the principles of HACCP. But what is HACCP? It stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, and it refers to procedures you must put in place to ensure that food you produce is safe. These procedures make up your food safety management system based on the principles of HACCP and allows you to identify and control any hazard that could pose a danger to the preparation of safe food and develop a plan of action for when things go wrong. Now I would like to go through the 7 principles of HACCP with you. The first principle is to identify the hazards. So for this, you will have to look at each step in your operation and identify what can go wrong. You should keep in mind that there are 4 types of hazards that you need to consider. And these are the biological hazards, For example, let's say that we have salmonella in a cooked chicken product due to cross-contamination with raw meat. We also have the chemical hazards, for example, cleaning agents, what else, pest control substances or pesticides. The third is the physical hazards. So we have hair, glass, or plastic. And of course, the last one, which is the allergens. The second principle then is to identify the most important points where things can go wrong. So a critical control point is a step in food processing where a control procedure must be applied to prevent a food safety hazard occurring or reduce it to a safe level. Then the third principle is to set critical limits at each CCP. And the fourth one is to establish a system to monitor and record what is happening at each CCP. How you monitor and how often you do it will depend on the size and nature of your business, but in general, monitoring should in all cases be very simple, clear, and easy to use. Then what is it? The fifth principle is to establish the corrective action to be taken when monitoring indicates that a particular CCP is not under control. And then you will have to prove that the system is actually working, and you will need to review and correct the system periodically. And at the end, lastly, you must keep in mind that you must keep documentation and records of all these. Here, I have an example from our Safe Catering pack that you can see here, which is an easy-to-use food safety management system for caterers. So here the question is, what can go wrong during cooking? Food poisoning bacteria can survive if food is not properly cooked. So what can you do about it? You must cook it to 75 degrees or hotter. And you should use actually a probe thermometer to measure the temperature of the thickest part of the food. If it is less than 75 degrees, you must cook the food for longer. However, there is certain flexibility in relation to compliance with the HACCP requirement, because the legislation recognizes that in low-risk food businesses, the prerequisite programs are sufficient to control food safety without the need to develop HACCP-based procedures. So compliance with the HACCP requirement may be achieved in one of these three ways. So for low risk, you can comply with the basic hygiene prerequisites. Also, you can use an established standard where the hazards controls and controls have been identified. For example, we have the FSAI hygiene standards. Or you can develop, of course, a food safety management system by applying the 7 principles of HACCP. For more information on this, the HACCP flexibility, you should have a look at our guidance note, number 11, that we have uploaded for you at the handout section, and you can download it, or you can find it also on our website. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now, I will briefly go through the prerequisite programs. These are good hygiene practices that are the basic conditions and activities necessary to maintain a hygienic environment. Once the prerequisites are in place, HACCP can then be used to identify and control any steps which are essential to ensure that safe food is produced. Some examples would be the premises layout and design, such as, for example, you should have sufficient lighting and hand washing facilities. Also the cleaning schedule, supplier control, procedures to prevent contamination, pest control, and provision of clear and simple work instructions. It's very important to understand here, though, that your food safety management system is not just a folder on a shelf, but instead it should be constantly reviewed, tested, and updated, and all staff should be aware of their role in making the system work. Now I would like to talk about the legal requirements in relation to training. So again, Regulation 852 of 2004 states that food business operators must ensure that food handlers are supervised and instructed and/or trained in food hygiene matters commensurate with their work activity. It It also requires that those responsible for the development and maintenance of the HACCP system must have received adequate training in the application of HACCP principles. But what does commensurate mean? It simply means that whatever level of responsibility you have or someone has in your food business, that they must be adequately trained for that level of responsibility. For example, a manager of a food business will require a higher level of training than someone serving food only. The first thing to say about how you, like as a food business, meet your training requirements is that one size does not fit all. So you really need to think about what's going to work for your business. Some of the options that are available to you would be to recruit a food safety trainer, or attend a course, avail of e-learning programs, or doing the training yourself. So the most important thing is that you must decide what works best for your staff and your business. Something else I would like to mention here is that doing a training course is not always necessary, depending on your level of experience and knowledge of food safety. It can be sufficient to use our training guides, which are available on our website. And what I mean here is that your inspecting officer will be more interested in your knowledge of food safety and hygiene, and they will be observing how safely you work with food than seeing a certificate from a particular course. I would like to talk to you now about the training guides that the FSAI has produced. So these training guides detail what skills people should have, how these skills should be demonstrated, as well as when food handlers should be able to demonstrate them. These guides and the skills detailed in them have been agreed by industry experts, inspectors, and training providers, and we have uploaded them again on the handout section, but you can also find them on our website. Okay, now I would like to explain the importance of having a traceability and recall or withdrawal system in place. So having a traceability system in place is a legal requirement, and you must be able to trace your food one step back until you supply another food business one step forward. You should identify the traceability information that is necessary for the effective functioning of your traceability system, but we would advise you to keep as much detail as you can, including process traceability where appropriate. So the legislation prescribes 4 pieces of supplier traceability information for food of non-animal origin or composite products that you must keep as a bare minimum. These are the name and address of the supplier, the nature of products supplied, and the date of each transaction and delivery. This information can be contained on the invoices, receipts, or dockets you get from your suppliers, and these records must be maintained until food can reasonably be assumed to have been eaten. And for sprouted seeds, we require extra information that need to be recorded, and the records must be updated daily and kept available for a sufficient time after the sprouts can be assumed to have been consumed. And lastly, for foods of animal origin, again, the information must be updated daily, and you must keep records for at least 3 years, though. But why is traceability so important? So even within the best managed food business, a food safety issue may occur. So if something goes wrong with a food product you have supplied, then an up-to-date and detailed traceability system will allow for speedy identification of the problem and quick recall or withdrawal of the affected products if necessary. It also minimizes reputational and financial damage to your food business. In order to comply with the law, you should also establish a food recall or withdrawal system that can effectively and efficiently remove affected food from the market. But what's the difference now between a recall and a withdrawal? A recall is required where the food has already reached the consumers, and consumers must be informed in these cases, while withdrawal is required where the food has not reached the consumer. So what are your responsibilities? First of all, you are legally responsible to remove unsafe food from the market. Where food has reached the consumer, you must also inform consumers of the reasons for the removal of the food from the market. Also, you are legally required to notify and cooperate with the competent authorities, and you must also notify other food business operators who are affected. So you should establish a detailed system in order to know what to do and who you should contact, and you must keep the system up to date. I highly recommend reviewing our guidance note number 10 on product recall and traceability, which provides the requirements and the procedures for the identification and removal of unsafe or non-compliant food from the food chain. So other legislation that you need to consider. We will briefly talk about the labeling legislation, which is Regulation 1169 of 2011 on the provision of food information to the consumer, and we usually refer to it as FIC. It is quite a lengthy document and not such an easy read, but I will briefly outline some main points. But only like 1 month ago, FSAI had another breakfast bite on food labeling, and you can find the recording on our website. So I would advise you to watch this webinar as it goes into more detail. So this legislation covers what must appear on the label, the allergen declaration and nutrition labeling requirements, and sets the minimum font size. Also, the labeling that must be applied to food depends on the type of food being placed on the market and whether it is sold loose or prepackaged. Let's move now on the information that must be on the label, and it's summarized here on the list of 12 points, so you can see all the mandatory information. I'll just flag numbers 1 and 5, so it's the name of the food and the net quantity that have the little asterisks after it, and that means that this information must appear in the same field of vision on your label. So in other words, like me as a consumer, if I pick up your food product, I must be able to see those two pieces of information on the same surface under normal purchasing conditions. So I can just clearly see it at one glance, as opposed to having to twist and turn the food product. What I do need to flag here as well, even though we won't go into the details, is that there are a lot of other food commodities that have their own specific legislation and that will have labeling provisions within those. So what I'm saying here is that if you're making, for example, jam or chocolate, you will have to consider, of course, the general food labeling rules under FIC, but you will also then have to consider what other labeling provisions there are under that product-specific legislation. And just to say here that there is a full list of all of the legislation on our website, should you need any more information in each of the different food commodities. Now I would like to highlight the allergens, so it's the allergenic ingredients that you may use in your food product. And this is very, very important, as this is where we are getting into, I suppose, the safety element of food labeling. Because if you use any of these known 14 categories of allergens, you must clearly identify them on the label. As you see here, I have two columns of the allergenic ingredients. You are probably all well familiar with these. You've got the likes of mustard, eggs, fish, peanuts, but the two on the top that are highlighted are the cereals containing gluten, such as wheat, barley, rye, and oats, and the nuts that would be the tree nuts in this case. So when you use either the cereals or the nuts, you must declare the actual name of the cereal and the actual name of the nut, if you see here this important note. Okay? So how you declare the allergen information on pre-packed food? As you see on this example, at the top, allergens are declared in the ingredient list and are highlighted in such a way that you are emphasizing the name of the allergen in a typeset which clearly differentiates it from all other ingredients. In the case of food products that don't have an ingredient list, of course, you won't be able to highlight the allergens in the ingredient declaration, So you will just use the statement contains and put down whatever the allergen is. Now, for non-prepacked food, you must indicate allergens in writing at the point of presentation or sale or supply. In Ireland, the information must be provided in written form in English, or you can have it in Irish and English. They must be easily located and accessible before the sale or supply of the food. So the idea here is that customers must have the information before buying and must not have to ask for this information. And lastly, allergen information must be clear, legible, and relate directly to a food or beverage, so there is no confusion, for example, about which food it relates to. And here are just some examples of how to declare allergens on non-prepacked food. So you can see, for example, the menu board and an allergen folder. So now I would like to go through some considerations when operating from home or a mobile unit or food stall, because I understand that when starting a food business, the amount of food safety requirements can seem overwhelming for a small business. I will start with the domestic food businesses, as there are certain pitfalls which you must consider. So it's important to understand that producing food in your house for many people to eat is a serious undertaking and is not the same as cooking for the family. You will be entering into a highly regulated business area with serious legal obligations, and you should remember that you are legally responsible for producing food that is safe. So the first thing that you have to do is to contact the competent authorities straight away to discuss feasibility and register your business. In most cases, for domestic businesses, this will be the Environmental Health Office of the HSE again. They will make an appointment to visit your kitchen to ensure that they are happy for you to operate from home, and they can advise on any particular requirements or changes that may be needed. You should also consider that your kitchen may not be suitable for the type of volume of food to be produced, and you must keep domestic and business activities separate. So operating a food business from home can present specific problems that you should be aware of, because food can become contaminated due to normal domestic activities, so there must be proper segregation of business and domestic food preparation and activities. Also, we have contamination due to poor hygiene, for example, not washing hands properly or frequently enough, using dirty clothes and tea towels, poor cleaning practices, dirty equipment or utensils. And also food can be contaminated if you're working when you're ill, changing or feeding babies in food preparation areas, people or pets entering food preparation areas again, and facilities being too small. So what else can go wrong when using domestic premises? The production of too much food for the size of the area can be another problem. You must limit the amount of food you produce to the amount that you can safely produce in your kitchen. Also insufficient refrigerator space to keep food chilled, and the lack of equipment necessary to cool food fast enough after cooking should also be considered. For example, if you're producing or using medium or high risk food, you have to store it in a fridge, and a separate fridge is required for this purpose. Lastly, you should consider that the type of food being produced or the process involved presents too high risk to take place safely in a domestic kitchen, and the food may be supplied, of course, to a vulnerable group such as babies, pregnant women, and the elderly. Now I will briefly go through the requirements of mobile units or food stalls. Again, as with all food businesses, all food stall operators must follow the general hygiene requirements that apply to them, and you can find them on Regulation 852 of 2004. This includes the notification of the food business, the hygiene requirements, the food safety management system, training, and traceability systems. Now, here, in relation to the registration, you should notify your local HACCP office in the area where the food stall is normally kept. Once you notify the HACCP of the food stall, then you can operate from the notified stall at any location around the country. But you should always have the confirmation of your registration available when you're operating. I would also like to know that the establishment where you produce the food must be also notified, and is subject to inspection, even if it's a domestic kitchen. Okay, food stalls must comply with the general requirements set out in Chapter 3 of Annex 2 of the Hygiene Legislation. But our guidance note on food stalls is extremely useful and provides detailed information for each of these requirements. So you can find information on design, personal hygiene, the waste disposal, transport, storage, everything. Of course, we don't have the time now to go through all of this together, but you should definitely review this guidance note that provides all necessary information. Here, I have a list of useful publications that you can find on our website. Some of them, we have linked them on the handout section, and you can download them now, but we will also send you another email after the webinar with some links, with some useful publications. However, I totally recommend visiting the food business section of our website, as you will find more information on all topics we discussed today. And here I have, for example, a screenshot of our website, and you should click here on the food business tab, and you can also find all our publications on the publication tab. On screen now, you can see the different ways you can contact us here in the FSAI. And I would like to thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm going to turn back on my camera now, and I think Emma is going to have some questions that you have asked during the presentation also.
Foteini, thank you so much for a really insightful talk on starting a food business. So we've lots of excellent questions coming in here now from attendees. Now we won't get to all of them as we just have a few minutes left, but I'll pick out a few. And if we don't get to answer your question, or if you think of another one after the event, please email us at info@fsai.ie and we'll get back to you. So Foteini, I'll start off with the first question here. And yes, this one is in relation to allergens. So is it sufficient to label allergens by a number code on a menu? So for example, cereals 1.
Yes. That's completely fine. It's up to you to decide what is the best way. The most important is from our side, and it's a legal requirement to provide the allergen information to your customers. Now, how will you code it or how you want to present this is completely up to you. The most important is that consumers will be able to get this information before they purchase the food.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Thank you. So on to the next one we have here from one of the attendees. Do you have a list of registered food safety trainers?
No, the FSAI does not recommend or endorse or approves food safety trainers, and there is also not an accreditation body for food safety trainers in Ireland. So it's simply a matter of just searching online what works best for you and your business, and what will meet your requirements. But what we have on our website, and I totally recommend having a look into this, we have a checklist with points that you should consider when you want to hire a food safety trainer. So we have a list of questions and the points that you should have a look before you find someone.
That's great. Thanks, Foteini. And while we're on the topic of training, here's the next one. So how often should I give refresher training to my staff?
Okay, no frequency is set out in legislation, so it's completely up to you to understand what are your staff needs for training, what if there is any knowledge gap in food safety training. If, for example, you might have a new process in your business, a new activity that most of your staff are not really familiar with. So it's up to you to see what are the needs, how safely your staff are working with food, and then you can just, but again, there is not a requirement to have refresher trains. And what I said during the presentation earlier is that your inspecting officer will not come to inspect your premises and see for a specific certificate from a particular course. They will just observe how safely you work with food and what's the knowledge of in food safety from your staff.
Great, thanks, Foteini. I'm actually going to jump to another training one. I think that's the last training one I have here, just while we're on the subject. So how do I obtain training licenses and parking permits for my food truck?
Yes, I think it's more, it's trading licenses probably, because license
Oh,
for
that's a
training.
trade. Okay.
Yes, so this is a different thing. So from the food law, you will have to register your business. So in this case, it's a food truck. You must register it with the HACCP. But for permits, parking permits and trading licenses, this is not covered under food law, so FSAI is not involved in this. So what you have to do is that you will have to talk and contact your local county council.
That's great. Thanks for answering that one, Foteini. And we've time for a few more, so I'll pop on to the next one. So if I sell only coffee and tea, but no food from my food truck, do I need to register?
Yes, if you remember, as we started the presentation with the definitions from the General Food Law, which is 178 of 2002, like coffee and tea in this case are considered food. And then if your food truck sells only coffee and tea, this is considered a food business. So yes, you will have to register your business again. In this case, it's the HACCP.
That's great. Thanks, Foteini. And that's actually a really popular question. We've had a few of those in this morning, so hopefully that's helped some of our attendees. And another one here, I have a restaurant and I want to operate as a takeaway. What should I do?
Okay, if this is a new activity, the first thing that you have to do, as we said earlier, is that you will have to inform your local environmental health officer about this new activity, and they will be able to provide specific advice for you. But in general, because of course it depends on the type of business and what exactly you produce in your restaurant, is that as this is a new activity, you will have to review this process and identify any possible new hazards that you are currently not involved in your existing food safety management system. And after you do this, of course, you will have to update your food safety management system to reflect this. Also, something else that you need to consider is how are you going actually to maintain the temperature of hot and cold food until your food is handed over to the customers. And something else, another consideration is the food packaging. So, for example, you should ensure that the food packaging that you are going to use is suitable for coming in contact with food.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Foteini. We have time for one more, and this one is actually, it's quite a popular one, especially with markets coming up to summertime. So, do I need a refrigerator on my food stall?
Okay, there is not a straightforward answer, yes or no. The first thing is to talk to your EHO, because they will know their needs, your needs, and what exactly is required. They will see the design, the layout, and everything. What I can say in general for everyone is that, for example, all food that is susceptible to microbial growth, they must be maintained at temperature of 5 degrees or less. So you should have a refrigeration system in place in order to make sure that this temperature will be maintained. Now, if you don't have a refrigerator in your food stall or food truck, and you will have an alternative option, for example, the insulated cool boxes, what you have to do is that you must demonstrate that actually this option, this alternative option, can actually ensure that the temperature will remain stable and will be maintained during both the transport and also the operation.
Okay, great.
Helps, but yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Foteini. And that's the end of our question and answer session this morning. So look, apologies to those of you who sent questions in that we didn't get to answer. As I said, please email your question to info@fsai.ie and we'll get back to you. So thank you so much for taking the time to tune in this morning. Just a few things before we say goodbye. A survey will launch after this event, and we really appreciate your feedback. It will help us create future events suited to your needs. Also, just to note that we run a number of free events for small food businesses throughout the year, just like this breakfast bite. So please subscribe to our event alerts, and you'll see the link there in the chat, fsai.ie/subscribe. And you'll receive a notification as soon as registration opens for the next event. So that's all from us here this morning. Thank you so much to Foteini for speaking, and to Elaine and Aoife working away behind the scenes. And again, thank you all for joining us. Take care.
Thank you.